Excellent. Well, listen, I've been asked to say a very quick word to introduce you. It will be very, very quick because, you know, everybody knows Marc Okrand is the reason why we're all here and therefore really does not require any introduction. And the author of the Klingon Dictionary, the creator of the Klingon Language, and he's here to answer your questions. As you've been told before, we're not here to talk now about the new words, but pretty much other questions can be asked, and Dr. Okrand will provide us the answers that he can. So, Dr. Okrand, I'll pass the floor to you. I don't know whether you want to make sort of opening remarks and then go before taking questions, or whether you want to jump right into questions. We're in your hands.
All right, I'll make very few opening remarks and then jump into questions. First, this is really weird for me. I don't know, nobody here is, besides me is probably old enough to remember a TV show called Romper Room. It was a kids TV show. Remember that? It was a kids TV show. At one point, the teacher on Romper Room would take a mirror and hold it up and say, "I can see," and then she would say the names, presumably of all the people watching, of the kids watching on TV. And she must have been primed because she said the names of real kids, and then because their parents said something and the kids would get all excited. And all that. And that's what I feel like. I'm looking at all these things. I can see so-and-so, and I can see so-and-so, and I can see so-and-so. It's like that. And the other thing that's weird, not this right this second, but this event is listening in or watching on Discord. I don't know what it feels like to you, but I feel like I'm sitting here at home and watching everyone else is at the qep'a except me. That's what it feels like. So I'm kind of listening in. So the qep'a is really happening somewhere, somehow, and I'm the only one that's kind of looking in on it instead of physically being there. What this is supposed to be all about, this session, is not so much, you know, questions and answers about the intricacies of Klingon phonology or morphology or syntax or any of that stuff, but more of what did I do? What was it like being involved? Who came first? What's the history of this whole enterprise? There's people, I was going to say running around. I don't know if anyone's running around during this virtual qep'a, but there's people online all over the place who are superbly qualified to talk about all that technical language stuff, and probably better than I am because they're more up on it these days. What I did started scarily enough in 1984, which is what, 700 years ago or something like that. And it's turned into this, which is absolutely astounding. So let's see if there's any questions from anybody. I don't know how to, Michael, I don't know how we want to do questions in terms of taking turns, but I see someone waving hands named cha'maH, I guess.
Questions in the text chat, if you want to look in there.
Oh, okay. But go ahead. cha'maH.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My first question is, do you speak German?
No.
Okay, then in English. Marc, I wish I always use your Pokov, or what is the name of your translation?
Of?
The Klingon translation to English and
Dictionary,
English.
yeah.
Yeah, dictionary. And I type well always Picard, but the problem is the Picard cannot display well in the translation, but if I want to type it in the, so as example, Dropbox of dogs, so you know what I mean? So in the chat, and so I wish, please, Picard.
Okay, that's, yeah.
I write easier Picard than in our letters. With our letters, it's so difficult for me.
Oh, that's just because you have jumping uppercase letters. Why not? And that, what you're talking about is qep'a, which is the app, the dictionary app, which I have absolutely no connection with, other than all the words in it I made up. That was done by David, and some other people helped out, especially with the Apple version of it and stuff like that. So I would, direct your concerns to them, because I have no idea how it works. I'm just thrilled that it's there, because I use it all the time. It's the best, it's the most up-to-date list of all the vocabulary, because the most recent edition of the Klingon dictionary, the printed one, the one with the white cover that's now a red cover, came out in 1992. And there's been a lot of stuff happening since then. So qep'a is the best source of up-to-date stuff. And I suspect that after tomorrow, there'll be an update to qep'a as well. Let's see.
Are there questions? People raising their hand, or I see there's a question in the chat. Mokedem.
I have a question about pronunciation, if you'll take that.
Yeah, I'll take that.
Yeah, it's about diphthongs across syllable boundaries. We've got the word, which I'm pronouncing Doyichlan and Niagara, but the source language obviously have Deutschland and Niagara, which if you go in across a syllable boundary with that diphthong, that would happen. And the same thing came up in Duolingo, for which I've been recording thousands of sentences. Somebody asked about the diphthong in jiyaj, and we were like, no, there's no diphthong there. It should be jiyaj. But when you listen carefully, you realize it does come up, because you get that your mouth back for the I, and then the y comes, and it's really hard not to say jiyaj. Comments?
You're supposed to say jiyaj.
And the other two?
The other two do it. I think you would do it Klingon-like, not original language-like, because it's adapted into Klingon phonology. When the Klingon sound system was designed, I'm making it sound like I had no connection to that. One of the things I thought about, let me back up a little tiny bit. When I started working on Klingon, at the very, very beginning, it was for one project only, and the project was Star Trek III. But I was asked to make a Klingon dialogue for Star Trek III, and there was, I don't know how many lines in the script that I made up. I made up Klingon, a lot more Klingon lines than ended up in the movie, but I didn't make up anything that was not in the script originally. And in talking to the producer and all that stuff and deciding how to go about doing it, we talked about this, that, and the other thing. And one of the things I decided to do, or one of the things I was instructed to do, because this was work for hire, it wasn't my idea to make up Klingon, it was Harv Bennett's idea, who was the producer of Star Trek III. One of the things I decided to do is to make it alien, and because they're aliens. And so what does that mean linguistically? It means a few things grammatically and so on. But in terms of phonology, I had two kind of, well, more than two, but two restrictions or guidelines. One was it should sound weird, and the other, from an Earth language point of view. And the other one is it had to be pronounceable by real human actors. Okay, so there's no sound in Klingon that you can't make with your normal human throat and tongue and teeth and all that stuff, because the actors had to be able to pronounce this stuff. What makes it, one of the things I thought about it that makes it alien, to use that funny word, is that the combination of sounds, the set of sounds in Klingon would not ever occur in a real human language. Any individual sound might, but the collection is unique. They don't go together in the same language the way languages work. And what follows from that is sometimes it's hard to pronounce correctly. So the jiyaj is a good example of that. Because if you're doing Klingon pronouncing the word in sort of a natural human way, then the Y sound is going to influence the preceding is sound. It'll come out more like G, or might come out more like G instead of J.
It's good. That's a choice that I made with the Doyitchlan and Niagara. Well, that's not
Right.
my course. On that
So,
topic about influencing, could you do the irch sound like charg, cherg, chirg, churg?
charach, cherach, chirach, churach. Is that what you said?
It's not exactly what I said because I'm not doing the R the same way you are. That's what I needed to know. Thank you.
But anyway, I knew that it would be difficult for the actors to pronounce some of the things, not the jihad. There was other things too that are hard to do. If there's a T and a D next to each other, that's weird. If there's an N and a D next to each other, because the place of articulation, what you're doing with your tongue, is conflicts with each other a little bit. But I also knew that I only had to get the actors, work with them, practice, practice, practice. They only had to get it right once, because once it was on film, they'd never have to say it again, right? Because that was what the project was all about. So I wasn't concerned that it was difficult to pronounce. I knew it was difficult to pronounce, but that's okay. Just get it and don't worry about it anymore. When I was working on Star Trek 3, I had no idea that it would turn into what we're doing here today. Right? I had no idea that people are going to really, really speak the language and talk about it in the kind of detail that people are talking about it in. Had I known that, I don't know if I would have done it differently, but I might have. I'm not sure. I'm glad I didn't, but I think I might have been influenced differently. I have no idea if that answers your question, Cole.
Yes, that answers my question. I listened through a video that you'd done and you'd skipped that sound, the rrr, which is after some vowels, it's quite difficult to get the trill in there. So I needed to make sure that it actually was supposed to be there.
Yeah, and it's difficult partly for the reasons I just said. Yeah.
I received a text from Mokadem, who has a question for you. Mokadem, do you want to ask your question?
Do I see these texts?
I'm wondering if he's on mute.
Yeah.
One moment.
The question he asked is, which language groups have you studied, and what impact do you think that these have had on the wonderful Klingon whole?
The ones I studied the most, well, in school I studied Spanish because I'm from California and that's the native language of California, despite what other people might say. I studied Chinese for a long time, Mandarin for a while. I studied Burmese for a while. But mostly I studied American Indian languages, and of those mostly from the West Coast, and of those mostly from around California. So those are the things that not intentionally influenced Klingon. And what I mean by that is when I was making up Klingon, I was trying very hard not to make it resemble anything in particular. There was a couple of reasons for that. One is it's not anything in particular, meaning it's not related to an Earth language, so it shouldn't resemble any of them. And the other is, at the time I did it, which is Star Trek 3 time, all we knew about Klingons is what we saw in the original series. And in the original series, everyone thinks about the Klingons being the aliens. They're the enemy. They're the ones that Captain Kirk fought all the time and stuff like that over the 3 years of the original series. And actually, the Klingons are not a major plot element of the original series episode, except for maybe 3 episodes. They occur in other episodes, but they're only the major antagonists, I guess, in 3 or 4 of them. So it's not like they're there all the time or something. But anyway, from those episodes and from the script of Star Trek 3, which obviously I read, but no one had seen it yet, what we knew about Klingons is they are fierce and warlike and mean and terrible and awful, and you wouldn't want to get near one or be one or anything like that. They're just bad. So I wanted to make sure that when I made up this language that it didn't sound like any particular Earth language, because if it ended up sounding like, I don't know, Thai, then I got everyone in Thailand mad at me for making their language be the language of these awful people. So I tried very hard not to make it sound like anything in particular. Now, having said that, you can't help but be influenced by what you know. So as I'm going along doing things, I say, oh, this is kind of like the way they do it in Chinese, or oh, this is kind of like they do it in Navajo. So I would stop doing whatever that was. I wouldn't necessarily throw it out, but I would stop doing it. And the next thing I would do would be as different as possible from that. So it wouldn't, in any obvious way, have the characteristics of whatever language I thought it was resembling. That kind of backfired on me a little bit, of course, because everything I do backfires on me a little bit. One of the things I was really careful about is I wrote my doctoral dissertation about a California Indian language that at the time I did my work, the language was extinct. The last fluent speaker had died in 1930. And I didn't get to this stuff till the 60s and early 70s, which is a long time ago, my God. And I wanted to make double sure that the language didn't resemble that language, because that would be the obvious thing that people would look at first. And in fact, after Klingon came out, meaning after the dictionary came out and people started talking about it and stuff, there was a paper written by, I don't know, professor, a student in the Netherlands, comparing Klingon with this Indian language to see if what I did for Klingon really was taken from that language. And the guy who wrote it concluded, no, it doesn't resemble, except in the most general kinds of ways. They don't resemble each other, which is good. I'm glad that was the conclusion. Well, it turns out that even though the language was dead when I was working on it, that doesn't mean the people were dead. There was still a tribe there, and they knew what was going on and stuff. And like everybody else, after a while, not when I was working on it, because that was, as I say, in the 70s, but later on in the 90s or something, they, like everyone else, got online. They got a website and talk about their history and their culture and this, that, and the other thing. And one of the pages on their website talks about me and the fact that I worked on their language and what I did and so on and so forth. And then it mentions that I also created Klingon based on their language, and they're very proud of that. So I was asked to give a talk a bunch of years after that to the tribe to talk about working on their language. And they wanted to know how Klingon fit in with that. And I thought about it. And even though Klingon doesn't fit in with that in terms of any specific phonology or morphology or anything like that, with one exception, the way I approached the language was very, very similar. In other words, the way I described the language in the dictionary, the grammar part in the dictionary, the organization is basically the same as the organization of my dissertation. Is how one at the time wrote a grammar of a language, is the same sort of thing. And when I worked on the Indian language, as I say, I had 0 speakers. And when I started working on Klingon, I had 0 speakers. You know, it was exactly the same. So with the Indian language, to figure out how it worked, I had literally reams of paper to go through and see what the anthropologist in the past or a missionary had written down. With Klingon, I didn't have that. Well, I did. It was exactly the same. I take that back. Because when I wrote the dictionary, when I sat down to write it, it was like writing my dissertation all over again. What I mean by that is I gathered together all my notes that I'd prepared for the movie, whether or not anything specific in those notes ended up in the movie. You know, the stuff that I worked on that I would not have come up with it were not for the movie script. And I said, okay, now we're going to talk about this. So look, I looked at all the words that I'd made up and say, okay, here's the sounds that I used. And so, and actually when I originally did the dictionary, when I got the page proofs, I discovered I left a sound out. So at the last minute, I stuck in a sound that somehow got ignored. It was the V sound. The list of sounds in the original dictionary, the V wasn't there. It was in the first printing, but not prior to that. So I did that. And for the grammar, I gathered together sentences that exemplified a particular characteristic. And I remember one time in particular, And I don't remember what the characteristic was, what the grammatical feature was, but there was a part, I had like 5 sentences maybe that exemplified whatever that was, a pronoun or I don't know, whatever it was. And 4 of the 5 sentences, the pattern made perfectly good sense to me. Yeah, that's what I did, and that's why I did it. I remember that. That was what that was all about. Sentence number 5 didn't fit. I said, okay, what was I thinking of when I did sentence number 5? Why is this one different from all the other ones? Thought about it and thought about it. Couldn't figure it out. I said, oh, sentence number 5 never made its way into the movie. I can just cross it out. So I eliminated that. So sentences 1 through 4 worked fine, and the description of them went into the dictionary. Sentence number 5, it's gone forever and ever. I don't know what that was all about. I could not do that when I was writing my dissertation. When I was writing the dissertation, if I had 5 sentences, 4 of which made sense and 1 didn't, I had to figure out what number 5 was all about. But for the Klingon dictionary, if no one ever heard that line, it doesn't exist.
Okay, let me move on to another question. So Isram asks if sign language, ASL, had any effect on Klingon?
Yeah, a little bit. How am I going to explain it? I had, at the time I was working on Klingon initially, I was very, very involved in the deaf community here. And I had a lot of deaf friends in which we communicated with sign language, of course. Well, not of course, but we communicated with sign language. And they were kind of upset with me because they knew I was working on this language with the film and they thought that Klingon should be a sign language. And I said, well, I think that's a cool idea, but I don't think the producers would go for that. So Klingon is not a sign language. But there were certain things about ASL that I kind of was influenced by, I think. I'm not going to say exactly what it was. Honestly, now I'm not going to dredge up an example, but it has to do with the topic comment kind of thing. But I'm going to have to think a bit about what I mean by that. But okay. Yeah, there was some subtle influence from that. Yeah. Well, the whole perfective thing too.
So that it doesn't exist. Finish. ASL, but not
this means poo. Suffix poo, not plural, the other one.
Okay, so next question. You've kind of talked about this a little bit, but is there a specific thought process behind the construction of each language you create, or do you stick to like a specific kind of model? Because you've done several languages.
Well, I hope they're all different from each other because all the ones I've done have been made up for science fiction films. Is that right? Well, except for one that wasn't a science fiction film. It was a silly comedy. That was, I didn't even know if that was a language. After Star Trek 3, I got a call from, well, I didn't know who it was from, but it turned out to be Walt Disney. Well, not Walt Disney, but Walt Disney Company. And they wanted me to make up a language for a TV show starring Christopher Lloyd, who was Krug, right? And I think that was the connection. And the TV show was called The Dictator. And the plot was, the premise was that Christopher Lloyd plays a dictator of some South Sea island nation, and he gets deposed. And he and his family flee to Queens, New York, and they open a laundromat. That's the premise of the show. And they wanted to have a Polynesian-like language that they kind of brought with them that they would use from time to time. So I made that up, but it wasn't, I said, it wasn't necessarily really making up a language because all they wanted was vocabulary. They didn't want sentences. They just wanted vocabulary, and they didn't want the words to mean anything, as bizarre as this sounds. They just wanted to have a set of words, I forget how many they wanted, that sounded Melanesian or Polynesian or something. So I paid attention to those kinds of languages so this would kind of fit in. But no, they didn't want to assign meaning, so that when the writers were writing the stories, they said, hey, we need a word for pineapple. Okay, let's pick this one. Oh, we need a word for palm tree. Okay, let's pick this one. Okay, and then they would flesh out the vocabulary that way. Very strange way to do conlanging, I think, but anyhow. The only part I created that I did pay attention to in terms of meaning was the numbers. I made up the numbers for 1 through 10, and I made them fit in with a Polynesian numerical system, so that if someone found this list of numbers 1 through 10, and they looked at it and said, hey, it's clear that these are from some Polynesian, Melanesian language, Austronesian language, or other, but I'm not sure which one it is. Okay, that was my goal with those, but the others is just nonsense. Other than that, all the languages I made up in for science fiction movies, so they were supposed to be weird and out there. So I paid attention that the structure for one and the sounds for one shouldn't be like another, but beyond that, there was no guidelines. Sometimes there was guidelines from the producers. They had certain ideas, not often, but every once in a while, do this. You know. Well, even Klingon, you know, the script says that Klingon is guttural. So there's a phrase in an instruction in the Star Trek 3 script. You know, Krug says in his guttural Klingon. I said, well, if Krug says in his guttural Klingon, it should be guttural. Guttural is not a technical phonological term, but I assumed what they meant by that was kinds of sounds. And in Star Trek, the motion picture, which I did not work on, we can talk about that if you want. There's a ch sound and a ch sound, so I added the q sound to it because that was, well, partly because they were there already and partly because it said Krug speaks gutturally, so okay, fine. But generally they didn't have guidelines. Occasionally they had some suggestions.
So you said, you mentioned, you know, Star Trek 1, the motion picture. Go ahead and can you tell us the story about how those words came about and then how you got involved for the next Star Trek 3 and how you connected the two together? We hear lots of stories online about...
They're not true.
Right, exactly. We hear lots of stories online about how this got started. So it would be nice to have a recorded, definitive answer to it that we can point people to.
Okay, well, it's going to be a recorded answer. I don't know if it's going to be a definitive answer because I was not there at the time. But for Star Trek, the motion picture, as scripted and as originally envisioned, as far as my understanding goes, is there was going to be obviously there was going to be Klingons in it, because without Klingons, there's no plot to that movie. If you've seen the movie, right, there's these 3 Klingon ships at the beginning of the movie, and one by one they get zapped, and they're not in the movie anymore. And the whole rest of the plot is what happened to the Klingons, right? So if there was no Klingons in the movie, there wouldn't be a plot. So they're very important, even though they're not in the movie very much. But as originally planned, they were going to speak their own language, right? With subtitles and all that stuff. Also, that was going to be among the last segments of the movie shot, right? Because you don't shoot a movie in order. You shoot it for the convenience of the production company. Earlier on, they shot a scene on Vulcan, on the Vulcan planet, with Mr. Spock, who's undergoing a rite ritual, whatever, called Kolinar. And there's a woman who, I don't know what her title is, priestess or something, who's conducting this ceremony where she's going on and on about Spock and total logic and getting rid of all his human garbage and all this kind of stuff. She has a helper who chimes in, I think, once. And when that scene was shot, everybody was speaking, everybody means she and then the helper, because Spock doesn't say anything. She and the helper were speaking English because the script said to speak English. After they were done and they were editing and all that stuff, they said, you know, this doesn't work for them to be speaking English for several reasons. One of which was that they knew already, or maybe it was before they were doing editing, maybe it was earlier on in the production. They knew already that the Klingons were going to speak Klingon. And they thought it would be weird to have Klingons at the beginning of the movie speaking Klingon to each other, and then immediately afterwards have Vulcans speaking English to each other. So they said, no, they ought to speak Vulcan. So they hired someone named Harmut, I think was his first name, last name was Scharf, who was a professor at UCLA, who specialized in languages from India, and Sanskrit and things like that. And he made his job was to look at this sequence where this priestess is talking and basically make up gobbledygook that matched the lips but sounded different. So that's what he did. And then he had the language was modified a little bit by Jimmy Doohan. You have to replace Scotty. I say a little bit, I don't know how much, but he helped change it a little bit or somewhat. And then a different woman recorded it. So the voice you hear speaking Vulcan is not the voice of the woman you see doing that. So they did that for Vulcan, and then it was time later on in production to shoot the Klingon scenes. It was time to make up a language for Klingon. So they hired Sharf to do that too, because he did the Vulcan already. And he made up Klingon. That was unlike Vulcan, didn't have to be lip synced. Because actually all of Vulcan didn't have to be lip synced either, because she's not on camera all the time. So when she was not on camera, they could do whatever they want. But anyway, so he made up Klingon, but for whatever reason, they didn't, I don't know who they is. It just didn't work for them. So one of the producers named John Poville and one of the actors named James Doohan took what Sharf did. I think they threw out most of it. I don't know that, but that's my guess. And they came up with Klingon dialogue for the actor, Mark Leonard, who had played that Klingon guy, to speak. Their plan was that it should be noisy and harsh and things like that. I don't think they had any plans for the most part in terms of individual words, certainly not, no plans for grammar. And they made up all the dialogue that he was supposed to speak. And you hear that beginning at the very, very beginning of the film before they're gone. So, so we cha and cha yarush and all that stuff. Bah! Fire the torpedo, which is the only word that's clearly repeated twice. So that's why that means what it does, because he says it twice. Anyway, they did that, and years go by. Well, not that many years. I was in '79 when they made that movie, and Star Trek 3 that I did was '84. So I guess 5 years went by. And now it's time to do Klingon again, and I was hired to do the Klingon. I went back to the motion picture to do that. Some of you know this story I'm about to tell. And if Lauren, I don't know if Lawrence is here right now, but if he's here, he can tell the end of it. When we were filming Star Trek 3, what you do when you make a movie, unless you're the director, what you do mostly is hang around and don't do anything. You wait and wait and wait and wait while they set the lights and set the this and move the trees and whatever they're doing. So there's a lot of hanging around time. And one day, as silly as this sounds, one day I was hanging around on the Genesis planet, and next to me is Mark Leonard. I don't know what he was doing there. He had no scenes on the Genesis planet. He had no particular reason to be there that day. But he's standing there, and I recognized him, not from his role as the Klingon, because he was in heavy makeup, but because he also played Spock's father and was more recognizable as Sarek. Anyway, I introduced myself to him. He introduced himself to me. We found out we're both named Mark, so we already had something in common. And he said, what's your connection to this? And I said, well, I've made a Klingon. He said, oh, I taught Klingon in the first movie. I said, yeah, I know that. And he reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of paper. And there were his Klingon lines from the motion picture. And there were the lines I recognized, the cha yarush and all that stuff were there. And there was a whole bunch of stuff there that I didn't recognize at all. And he said, yeah, and this is the stuff that I said. And when I saw all those lines that weren't there at all, he said those lines too. And I go, oh my God, did I miss that somehow? Because when I watched the motion picture and preparing to come up with my Klingon, I thought I'd gotten everything that had come before. So I went back and watched it again. And in fact, he did say those lines. If you see the motion picture, before the Klingons get zapped, there's a scene on a Federation listening outpost station or something, where you see Mark Leonard's character, the Klingon captain or commander, whatever it is. You see him on a screen, and he's jabbering away because they're in trouble, and he wants everyone to know they're in trouble. But you can't hear him because two reasons. One is the volume is very, very low, and the other is the Federation folks on the station are talking. So you can't hear them. So they're in the movie, but they're not. So they don't count. Fortunately, they don't count because otherwise Klingon would be very different. Well, it wouldn't have matched the film for one, but also it would have been, Klingon would have been very, because those lines phonologically and so on didn't really match up with the ones that are actually in the movie. Anyway, it was nice to know that those things existed. Years later, the Smithsonian Institution, the Air and Space Museum in Washington, decided to have a Star Trek exhibit. So it must have been in honor of the something anniversary of Star Trek, probably the 25th is my guess. It's some anniversary that ends with a 5 or a 0. I think it was the 25th. And they knew, because it's Star Trek, that they were going to get a lot of people coming to this exhibit. So they did something they'd never done before at the Smithsonian, which is they got a lot of volunteers to be, I don't know, docents or guards or something for crowd control. So they wouldn't get too many people in the room at the same time. And there was hundreds of people, I think, who volunteered to do this. And when it was all over, the thing with the exhibit was there for several months. When it was all over, they had a big party celebration thanking all of these volunteers. And they invited me to the celebration. I didn't have to do anything except sit there, but they invited me to come. And they gave a few speeches, and they said, and we have a special guest. And the special guest was Mark Leonard. And that was announced ahead of time that Mark Leonard was going to be there. What they didn't announce ahead of time is that they had 2 special guests. And the second special guest was Majel Barrett, right? Who was Nurse Chapel and the computer voice and Gene Roddenberry's wife, at that time, Gene Roddenberry's widow. They didn't announce that she was going to be there. So the plan was that Mark Leonard would get up and give his little talk, and then he would introduce Majel Barrett. Big surprise. And Mark gave his talk, and I happened to be sitting in the front row. I was in the audience, but I wasn't part of this. And I could see someone was signaling to Mark, keep going, she's not here yet. So he talked a little more, and they said, keep going, she's not here yet. And he talked a little more. I don't know where she was. Everyone knew she was in town. She just wasn't in the building for some reason. And Mark clearly was running out of steam. And then he noticed me in the front row, and he said, oh, look who's here. And he invited me up on stage. He says, Mark did Klingon for the movies, this and that. And he reached into his pocket, and he pulled out a piece of paper, and it was the same paper with the same Klingon lines on it. And he says, I'm going to say the lines in Klingon, and you translate them into English. And I'm thinking, oh boy, if he says one of those lines that's not in the movie at all, I have no idea what that's all about. So he started off with something and then got into one of those, and then fortunately, Majel Barrett showed up. Saved the day, saved my day, and we went on. Now, the reason I say that story is not even over is because years after that, Lawrence tells me that he was on a Star Trek cruise someplace, and Mark Leonard was on it, and Mark and Lawrence got into a conversation. And at some point, towards the end of the conversation, Mark Leonard reached into his pocket and pulled out this piece of paper with these same Klingon lines on them and gave the sheet of paper to Lawrence. And to the best of my knowledge, that's where it resides now. What was the original question? It had nothing to do with any of that.
Well, no, I asked you about the Star Trek, the motion picture, but the original question was something about how you make languages. But I have more questions, so we can go on to another one. If you could do an immersion in any language that you haven't previously studied, what would it be? And would you pick an endangered language over a non-endangered?
Huh. Actually, as bizarre as it sounds, I would probably do an immersion course study in the language that I worked on for my dissertation, because even though it was dead at the time, 0 speakers, they're bringing it back. The speech community of the tribe is bringing it back on the basis of what I did and a lot of other stuff, not just mine, but mine is kind of the grammatical core for what it is. And I would really like to see something like that get going. And I think that would be a good way to do it.
Okay. So next one is, you did some work on discovery for Kelpian.
Right.
Do you created a few sentences? Do you think if that's gonna become a language, or is it just?
Well, it's already a language, I guess. Yeah, there's not that much Kelpian in it. I'm trying to think, is there any Kelpian? I honestly don't know. I was going to say, is there any Kelpian that hasn't been on TV? I honestly can't remember. Is there going to be any Kelpian coming up? I don't know. So I don't know if I've done all that there is. If there's a lot more, then I would consider writing it up and how it works and stuff. But I have no idea if that's the case. There's not enough now to worry about. Even though I make sure they get it right, and they do that with, like everything else, with greater or lesser success.
I've been told there are a few people with their hands up with questions. If you have questions, please put them in the text. It just makes it a little easier for me to figure out. And then moving on to the next one. In regards to the aspect system, are there any Earth languages that are similar to Klingon? There seems to be several different approaches to aspect out there.
There's Earth languages that resemble Klingon in any particular characteristic. Whether there's a language where the system matches entirely or even pretty much, I doubt it, but I don't know. And the reason I say I doubt is because I made it up. So I didn't make it up to match anything. It could by accident. Things happen by accident.
Okay, one person asked if you could go through some sounds for us real quickly. They specifically asked for S, GH, H, R, TLH, both Q's, and then RGH again.
Those are all the sounds I put in, so wouldn't be English and it would be hard.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. The S is a retroflex S, which means you make it by taking the tip of your tongue and pointing it straight up at the roof of your mouth. So it's sha, sha. It's not sa. It's not sh, like in she or should. It's sha. I don't remember the order of the things you said. I'm not President Trump.
GH?
The GH is a voiced uvular fricative. For those who know what those words mean. Not uvular, velar fricative. So it's your tongue is doing what you do for an English K, like that, except you're voicing and you're letting the air through at the same time. So it is not a Parisian R. The Q, both Qs, are uvular, which means it's the same as that K kind of sound, the GH kind of sound, but farther back in your mouth. So the back of your tongue is reaching towards your uvula, which is that thing that dangles down, like in cartoons. So the Q is a K, like it's just a voiceless stop, ah, ah, ah. And the big Q is an affricate, which means it's half a stop and half a fricative. It's ah, like that. What else did you say? I'm saving TLH for the end because that's the hard one.
Then H.
H. Okay, the H is the velar, is the voiceless counterpart to the GH, so it's a voiceless velar fricative. So like that.
And then R, and then R combined with GH.
Yeah, the R is lightly trilled. Frequently when people are speaking, including this person who's currently speaking, that doesn't happen. But if you're speaking very carefully, it should. I mean, the trilly part doesn't happen. With the RGH, actually, Robin asked about this at the beginning, earlier on. So if there's a vowel proceeding, would be like, Arg, 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 urg, like that. Is only TLH remaining?
Yes, only left is the TLH now.
Yeah, that one. The TLH is a voiceless lateral affricate. For those who know, again, know that terminology. You make it by putting the tip of your tongue behind your teeth or on the alveolar ridge, which is that little ridge right behind your teeth before you get to the hard part of the roof of the mouth, your hard palate. And then do like an L. Oh. But it's a voiceless L, so you're whispering the L. So it's a, and the T kind of sound that you originally put your tongue there for comes first. So it's a and fast. At the beginning, at the end, it's a T. And I'm sure there are people at the qep'a right now who can probably teach you better than I could.
Okay, you mentioned earlier that you didn't anticipate that Klingon would become what it's become when you created it. So what about its evolution has most surprised you the most? Or have you most enjoyed or least enjoyed?
Well, I most enjoyed this. I mean, the qep'a and everything associated with that. It was the people. The best part of making up Klingon is the people who I've met as a result of having done that. The best part of making up Klingon is not terrific relative clauses. That's not it. What I did not, as I said, I didn't anticipate that it would grow the way it's grown. I didn't anticipate that it would be on non-Star Trek things. I'm less surprised that it's on various Star Trek products, you know, games and shirts and whatever, than I am that it's in non-Star Trek things. It's in non-Star Trek TV shows, besides the Big Bang Theory, where you might expect it, but in others as well. I never would have guessed that. And because and the reason it's in the others is because Klingon has taken on a certain, it's occupied a certain place in our culture. So people recognize what it is, even if they can't speak the language. You know, if someone sneezes or coughs and someone else says, "Oh, are you speaking Klingon?" People get it, okay, because they know what Klingon is all about. That I did not expect to happen. And I don't think that happened specifically because, again, any features of the language, although maybe the rough character of it helped a little bit, but because it's Star Trek, you know, and Star Trek is everywhere. What I don't like, I think what I don't like about it is when people don't make the attempt to use it properly. And there's 2 degrees of that. And I'm not upset when people don't use it properly, because for some people it's hard. There's two degrees of that. One is when people don't try at all and just make up whatever, but they know that's what they're doing. And there's others where people think they're doing it right, but they don't take the effort to find out whether they're doing it right. You know, if you're going to do it right. Or at least try to do it right. I think that's better.
I agree. As somebody who also tries to make sure that it's done properly in places. Okay, on to another question. Is the impersonal passive suffix lu and how it changes the meaning of personal prefixes based on anything you've seen in a natural language?
Yeah. Next question.
Okay. Do you want to go into a little more detail, or no? Okay, then we'll just go on to the next question. Okay. Is there any part of the language you wish you didn't create? Something that it's too late to change now?
Yes. Well, I've talked about one of them, which is the lach problem, where you can't use both of them at the same time. Which I put into the dictionary as a joke, but once again, the joke came to bite me. Because it's a ridiculous rule. There's no reason that those should be in the same wrote the dictionary, again, when I wrote the dictionary originally, that's silly, I only wrote it once, but when I wrote it, as I said earlier, I didn't know that the language was going to take off the way it had. I didn't know that people were going to read it as carefully and repeatedly and microscopically as turned out. And when it was the first sort of rough draft of the very beginning of it, not kind of the introduction, but when the real part, I realized I was writing to linguists, and it was full of little references or little linguistics in jokes. And I decided that's the wrong thing to do. That's the wrong audience. It should be written to Star Trek fans, or at the very least, non-linguists, so people would understand it. So I threw out what I did originally and started all over again. It had a different approach. And the approach I took, rightly or wrongly, was that this is kind of like the language guides you get. If you're going to another country and you pick up the little Berlitz language guide, there's a little grammatical description, and then the dictionary with the words in your language on the left and the words in the country where you're going, their language on the right, or vice versa. And that's it. And the explanations are pretty good, but not quite as complete as they ought to be. And the definitions, there's no real definitions of the words. There's just sort of one-for-one matches, so you can't really tell which meaning of the English word that is, and stuff like that. And that was done intentionally because it was sort of a satire on those kinds of books. Once again, that in retrospect was probably not a good move, because it's caused all kinds of problems, or maybe it's good that it caused all kinds of problems, because it's raised all kinds of interesting discussions. The language has grown and prospered because of that. So that was a decision I might have done differently had I known that the language is going to go on the way that it's gone on. And as I mentioned earlier, I might have changed the pronunciation so that you could do it without really struggling in certain instances. And the reason you're struggling is because it's very unnatural for a human mouth to do it, not because it's impossible to do.
Okay. Have you ever thought about what a Romulan language would be like if you were to create one?
Well, I did, and then somebody else did again. There was a little bit of Romulan in the TV shows. I did Romulan for the J.J. Abrams movies, the first one. There's a bunch of Romulan in there. And it's kind of Vulcan-like, based on the kind of Vulcan that I did, but not quite, because they're not the same, but they're related. But somebody else did the Romulan for Picard, that, as far as I know, is not based on anything that I did at all. It's based a little bit on what came in Enterprise or wherever on TV. There was some Romulan.
One person asked if you had any experience with constructed languages prior to Klingon.
No, the only constructed language I had experience with prior to Klingon was Vulcan for Star Trek II, and I would not call what I did language construction. That was just gobbledygook lip syncing. Like what I explained about for the Klingon in the motion picture. They used the same technique for some Vulcan, or not to the Klingon, the Vulcan in the motion picture. They used the same technique for the Vulcan in Star Trek II in that short little scene with Spock and Saavik. Again, it was originally in English, but they dubbed it into Vulcan. And the reason that happened is because they wanted to change the subtitle. And they wanted to change the meaning of one of the subtitles, because I think they moved things around in the film so that the tense of the original line didn't make any sense anymore.
And you had to force it to be lip synced as well.
I had to force it to be lip synced, right? But I didn't have to pay attention to anything. Well, almost didn't have to pay attention to anything, because what Vulcan there was before that was in the original TV show. There's, I don't know, a dozen words, maybe 15 words that are all based on English phonology. They're all perfectly good English syllables. You know, on woon is this weapon. On and woon are perfectly fine English. And the word for challenge is kalifi. Kalifi is money you pay for a dog, and so on. So I paid attention to that, but that was easy. because it was all English, phonologically. The procedure for that little bit of Vulcan in Star Trek II was they showed me the scene. I wrote down what they were saying. I looked at their lips to see if their lips were doing something that didn't make any noise. And in fact, that was the case. Leonard Nimoy and Kirstie Alley, who plays SochDIch, each have 2 lines. And Leonard, the end of both of his lines, after he said them, he closed his mouth. He said, blah, 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 like that. There's no noise, no voice, language noise that goes along with that. But he did that. So I said, okay, then his 2 Vulcan lines are going to end with because his lips do it. So we'll make that match too. So I did that, but that was it. So it had to match the lip movements that were there, and it had to match the original TV show, which, as I say, was not tough. The day, I think they showed me that on a Monday, if I remember right. So we did the recording session with Kirstie Alley first. She and Nimoy were not there at the same time when we did the recording. And the day I went in to do hers, which was Tuesday or Wednesday, right before we went over there, the associate producer I'd been working with says, you know, in Star Trek The Motion Picture, they speak Vulcan at the beginning. We need to make sure that your language sounds like that, which I thought was the right choice, but why didn't you tell me that before I'd already made up all this stuff? So we went and he showed me the scene. He says, okay, make your language fit in with that somehow. So I didn't want to change what I'd already done because it already matched the lips, or at least I thought it did. So I'm listening to see if I'm hearing anything that you cannot see on the lips that I could kind of sprinkle in there. And there was. In that Vulcan, in the motion picture, there's these, for lack of a better word, guttural sounds. There's these velar sounds, kind of sounds. So I threw in a few into the Vulcan for Star Trek II, into that, and then, because you can't see them, so it didn't mess up anything I'd done. So we went in and I was working with Kirstie Alley, practicing the lines, so she could say them and see how they matched up with the English already on the film and so on. And the director of the film was Nick Meyer, overheard us practicing, and he called the producer aside and said, I don't know if this Vulcan is gonna work. And the producer said, why? And Nick said, I don't think Vulcan should sound like Yiddish. And he was hearing that. So the producer said, well, let's try it. Let's just try it. And if we don't like it, we'll do something else. And Nick says, okay. So we tried it and Nick liked it. So it stayed in there, whether it sounds like Yiddish or not.
A couple of people have asked if Maltz and yourself, by extension, have been safe and healthy during this COVID pandemic.
So far, so far we've been safe. Maltz is extremely safe because he's not very sociable. So he's not likely to come into contact with anybody. I don't know whether he could even get it, come to think of it, but I don't want to find out.
I was going to say, yeah, his social distancing is very effective.
Yeah.
Can you confirm or deny the internet rumor that you are going to be a visiting character as yourself in Star Trek Discovery in the olden days? Like, I guess.
I can't confirm or deny. I've not heard that rumor, but hey, that's cool.
Okay.
I haven't heard that.
I had not heard that one either, so that was a new one to me. What common learning pitfalls do you see in beginning and intermediate students with Klingon? And if are there any habits that you think are important to establish or avoid early on?
That's a better question for the folks at the qep'a who are actually doing the teaching. The only people I've ever taught to speak Klingon are the actors. And none of them wanted to learn Klingon to speak. They wanted to learn Klingon to pronounce. Now, some of them were a lot more interested in how the language worked than others. So Christopher Lloyd, for example, Krug, wanted to know what he was saying. What do the words mean? How does the sentence work and stuff like that? But it wasn't so he could speak it, it's so that he would know what he's saying and give it the right inflection and that sort of thing. Some of the actors just were 100% phonetic. They couldn't care less about what this was all about. Just tell me how to say it and I'll say it. Some of them were clearly more successful at this kind of learning than others. Some of them I worked with a lot and achieved some success. Some of them I worked with a little bit and achieved some success. Todd Bryant, who was played Claw in Star Trek V, was an instant picker-upper, you know, of the phonology. He's really good. There's
speaking of Clark, he still posts some of his Klingon lines on like Twitter. He had a Twitter account for a while, and he was like, "I still remember this line. I still remember this line."
Yeah, I think Spice, who played Vixis, also remembers her lines. I don't think any of the other Klingons besides those two probably remembers the lines. There was one very important line, a Klingon line in Star Trek VI that you probably know, which is tach pach tach bet, right? And if you know the movie, that comes up in a scene where the Klingons and the Federation are all together eating and drinking and so on. And when we shot that scene, not that line, but the whole scene, it took 2 days. So everyone was sitting around feasting for 2 full days, shooting the scene over, as they do in movies, you know, shooting the scene over and over and over again, because they got it from every conceivable angle and every conceivable close-up and pairing of, you know, shots with 2 people and shots from here and shots from there. Again, but they wouldn't do just a little scene. They would do the whole scene over again. So people said tach, 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 that a lot. Now people didn't say it. Christopher Plummer said it a lot. But I remember one time, must have been the first day, before we'd said it so many times. There was a lunch break, and then after lunch, they're shooting the scene again, and he forgot the line. And that was the one time I wasn't there. I don't know where I was. But then I came back, we read the line, it was okay. So when that's all over, I'm quite sure that all the people, even though they heard that line over and over and over again, do not remember it. And I've only encountered one Star Trek actor who years later did remember that line. And that was George Takei. And he was not in that scene.
Okay, does anybody who has been raising a hand that hasn't posted a question in the text chat have a question? You have to unmute yourself to ask the question if you have. I can't see. If you're raising hands, don't raise hands, just ask your question.
I'd be a little curious into hearing your opinion on perfect versus perfective.
That's another discussion for another time. Let's do that separately.
Any others? So it doesn't look like we have any more questions. Let me check Discord real quick and see if there's any questions over there.
I turned Discord off, it kept blooping at me all the time.
Are you not asking any more questions from the chat then?
We can do more if someone can.
The questions in the chat are, the only ones I see left are, how do we request an official word for our country name? And okay. I can do that by saying.
I had a couple in there. Kelsey Grammer's Klingon pronunciation was atrocious. I know he said he thought he could handle it on his own, but had you actually explained to him the pronunciation of the letters?
No. What happened with that is you know, they got a hold of me and said, will you translate these lines into Klingon? So I did, and I wrote them out. I honestly can't remember if I made a recording or not. I do remember I offered to work, you know, over the phone or something with Kelsey Grammer or with a producer. So maybe I didn't make a recording to pronounce those lines. And they said, thank you, but I never worked with anybody. And when I wrote out those lines, I wrote each line out 3 different ways. One way was in normal Klingon transcription, which is what we all have come to. I was going to say know and love, but it's really hate and detest. One was that same way, but with hyphens between the syllables because it's easier to read. And one was an English-like way. So if you read it as if it were English, you'll come close. It won't be right, but you'll kind of come close. And I explained all that that's what these were. And it turns out that the one he chose to pay attention to was the English-like one. And I gave a pronunciation guide for the Klingon ones, I think. The one that he paid attention to was the English-like one, but he read it as if it was a phonetic transcription, not English. Okay, so I would write things like, I'm making this up now, I can't remember the details, but I would write things like G-O-E. So he would say go, or G-O-E-D, goad. Okay, to pronounce it that way, and he would go go-ed. He read it very, very phonetically, and that's the way he pronounces it the way he does. He also left out one line, or the script writers, he didn't. The script writers, the script typists or something left out one line. So it was originally a 4-line little tribute, and he says lines 1, 2, and 4. Although at the end of the episode, when the kid, Berman, translates the Klingon back into English, he translates all 4 lines, even though Kelsey Grammer never said all 4 lines. And I think the reason that happened is because line 2 and line 3 began with the same Klingon words. Whoever typed into the script probably thought they did that line already and went on to the next one.
I wondered if he had a pronunciation guide, because if so, he apparently didn't even glance at it.
I'm pretty sure I did. I mean, I have no way now of looking all that stuff up. But again, he didn't look at the Klingon pronunciation anyway. He looked at the English-ish version.
Pity.
I don't blame him. I blame Noel. Noel was a bad teacher.
So one person asked, I'm sorry, you said another question?
I was just going to mention that Noel thinks Klingon for no is krish crush. So
yeah.
So one person asked, is the Morskan GHL a voiced I can't even pronounce this word, alveolar lateral fricative or something else?
Alveolar, yeah.
Alveolar, there we go.
Yes. I decided that just now, yes.
Okay, yes, good. Somebody asks, did they hear at the beginning of a syllable the TLH is more of a TL?
No.
I was going to say that the TLH sound does change.
And the H is just there as a way to, it's a traditional way to transcribe it. LH is a voiceless L. I mean, there's other ways to do it too, L with a line through it and stuff like that. But when I originally did the Klingon, it was before the dictionary. When I did the Klingon transcriptions for the actors, it was done on a typewriter. Remember those? And so I didn't do anything other than regular 26 characters. Or I guess 52 characters with caps.
I was told there was somebody else with a question, but I can't find that question now. Does anybody else have a question they would like to ask? If you do, just jump in and ask it.
May I ask a second question?
Yeah.
Just did.
Good point. Prior to Star Trek 3, what was your experience with Star Trek? Did you grow up watching the show? Did you know who the Klingons were?
Yeah, prior to Star Trek 3, my experience was Star Trek 2, because I did the Vulcan for that. But prior to that, when Star Trek, the original series, was on TV first go around, which was the late 60s, is when I was in college. And at the time, college students living in the dorms, anyway, which is where I was, for the most part, didn't have TVs. So I knew there was such a thing as Star Trek on TV, right? And other shows too, but I didn't see them because no one had a TV. Once in a while, I'd be at somebody's house who had a TV and I'd see an episode. So, you know, I knew early on who Kirk and Spock and all these people were, but didn't really sort of start figuring it out and latching onto it.
So no emotional investment in Klingons before you created their language.
No. Did anyone have an emotional investment in Klingons before that? I don't know. It has nothing to do with the language, but the Klingons, this prior to Star Trek 3. The Klingons were just, you know, in the original episodes a few times.
I know a few people who, that's how they got hooked on the Klingons, was
The original?
the
Yeah.
series, yeah.
We're past time. I'm happy to stay as long as you want, but I know there's other things to do. And unlike the in-person qep'a, you know,
I don't think we have a
different procedure for going into another room.
Well, he's asking. There were two other dream-related words rumored to have been revealed in addition to last year, but not publicized. Is that rumor true? Can these be revealed now?
I had to check it out. I saw that, and I must have been under the influence when that came up or something. I have to see what that's all about. They're probably fine, but I want to double check.
Backstage, they're giving you the same gesture that Mark Leonard was giving at that presentation.
Keep
You're
going.
encouraged
Keep
to go on.
Somebody asked whether you would be interested in returning to the town of Vulcan again.
Yes, yes. Actually, I'd be interested in returning to the town of anything other than the one I'm in at the moment.
I think many of them.
The one I'm in is just fine. It's just I've been here for a while. But yeah, no, Vulcan was a lot of fun. Vulcan was a lot. I was there the day I was there because they had their Volcon, I guess it was called, convention up there. But by chance, the day I was there was the day that they officially renamed one of the streets in the town of Vulcan, right? So they got new street signs and everything. And I was there with Robert O'Reilly, with Gowron, and other people too. But there was a street naming ceremony. So the name of the street, the new official name of the street is Klingon Way, which I thought was very cool to have a real street named after a book that I wrote.
Yeah,
that's not what they had in mind. They had a different kind of way.
Well, that was the kind of the inspiration for it, because that was a big movement by a lot of CAG members up there who wanted to get that street renamed, and then they want a Klingon bird of prey installed across from that Enterprise model.
They already have a Federation ship.
So go back to questions. Are there any future plans for language development? I assume Klingon, but maybe even other languages that you've worked.
The language development stuff I've done has always been work for hire. What I mean by that is I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about it's been done at the behest of somebody else. So, I've done Kelpian and some other stuff for Discovery. And if someone comes along and asks me to do something else, which they may or may not do, I would do that. But it's the beck and call of the movie or TV writers. I'd love for there to be more Klingon, because the way that the status of Klingon at the moment, from my point of view, is couldn't be better. Because in terms of what's on TV and stuff, it's in really good hands with Robin and Alan and Chris, you too. So I don't have to do it. If a new word is needed, we can do that. But other than that, it's running superbly. Have
you ever thought about trying to convince maybe CBS or Pocketbooks to do an updated version of the TKD? Have they ever come to you and asked you about it?
They did come to me and ask me about it. Oh boy, when was this? It was just several years ago. And it wasn't Pocketbooks or CBS. It was another company that has a contract with Pocketbooks and CBS. I don't know how all this corporate stuff works. But in any event, it was legit. It wasn't a fly-by-night thing. Because they've published other things, other Star Trek related things. And they had an idea of coming up with a new dictionary. In fact, even before they contacted me, they mocked one up and sent me their idea. And even though some of the information in it was a little screwy, but that's okay, it was a mock-up. It was kind of pretty. It was like one of those dictionaries, had little pictures, so instead of just the word whatever, the word douge for a ship, there'd be a picture of a bird of prey, and then underneath it would say douge or whatever, that kind of stuff. And the editor, whoever that was for that project, ended up leaving that company, and it got assigned to somebody, the project got assigned to somebody else. And then they went to CBS. I don't know why that was the order of events. And CBS said they didn't want to do it. I don't know why. So that was the end of it.
Okay, next. Did you choose hack for surgery from a real life experience?
No, I chose it because it just sounded like a way that Klingons would do surgery.
What first drew you to linguistics and endangered languages?
Well, what first drew me to linguistics was, chance. When I went to college, the college I went to was brand new. I was there the second year of its existence, and it was the University of California in Santa Cruz, and it was built on the Oxford or Cambridge system, which meant it doesn't work this way anymore. But there was going to be a bunch of separate colleges. They're all part of the same campus, but individual colleges. You would be a student at one particular college and take your classes there and associate with professors and stuff, which is not to say you couldn't go to another to take a class or anything like that. And each one had different characteristics, different specialties. So when I went to, the specialty was social sciences, and they had a course that all the freshmen had to take. And the first quarter of that course was called Language, Culture, and Society, or Language, Society, and Culture, whichever way it went. And it was a course about language, but from all kinds of different points of view. And what they originally planned on doing, I don't know, but what it turned out to be was an introduction to the disciplines and an introduction to the faculty. So that 1 week it would be a presentation by a philosopher, and then 1 week by a historian, and 1 week by a psychologist, and 1 week by a literature guy, and 1 week by a philosopher. Language was a thread running through it, but other than that was all these different things. And it was great because you got an introduction to philosophy, an introduction to psychology, and also an introduction to the faculty. And at the time, the campus was very small, so you'd see these professors all the time, and now you would know who they are and all that. The person who introduced it the first week and kind of wound it up at the end of the last week was the linguist. There was only one linguist on campus at the time. And the way he talked about language was a way I'd never heard of before. I'd taken Spanish in school, to learn a language, but that's not the same thing as the way linguists look at languages. And I thought that was absolutely fascinating. So when the course was over, I said, I'm gonna pursue this. This is fun. So I took Linguistics 1. That's not what it was called. It had a better number than 1. And then when that was done, I took Linguistics 2. That was great. And then summer came. And when I came back after the end of summer, they'd already revamped the entire linguistics program. It was only 1 year old. They changed it already. And Linguistics 3, or what would have been Linguistics 3, had disappeared. It got combined with Linguistics 2. So there was nothing for me to take because they didn't want me to take Linguistics 2 again, because I already taken half the course. So they set up an independent study between me and the one professor to talk about what would have been discussed in Linguistics 3, which is historical linguistics and language change and stuff like that. And it was working one-on-one with the professor, and instead of just doing textbook kind of work, he gave me some real linguistic data to work on, which happened to be from a couple of American Indian languages that were dead, that were related to the one I ended up doing my dissertation on, but working on real linguistic material that was kind of this great detective work. Because again, it had to be just based on the material I found in front of me, or what I was gonna say dig up, that's a bad analogy, but you know what I mean. That was the click. That's what made me really interested, both in linguistics and in dealing not so much with endangered language. It was more than endangered, it was gone. Although now, as I say, they're trying to bring it back.
So somebody asked, what are the long-term plans for the Klingon language? Where do you see it 50, 100 years from now? Do you see it still going strong, or?
I hope so, but that's up to you guys.
I was going to say, that sounds more like something that's on us.
Yeah. So far, you're doing a really good job, a much better job than I could have done. So.
Yeah, I intend to keep going for as long as I can. So, do we have any other questions? Are there some I've missed? I'm sure I have. There's lots flew by.
I'm kind of hoping that my microphone works now, but I wanted to thank Marc Okrand for coming to Vulcan. I was his host that weekend. Oh. Thank you for telling me that my tattoo I've been mispronouncing my tattoo for 25 years.
Yeah, mispronunciation tattoos, you shouldn't do that.
And again, thank you for helping me translate the Swift Hawk and Cuddle Dungeon.
Oh, right, yes. Okay.
So again, thank you very much.
And
explaining cha'maH.
Oh, I'm explaining cha'maH to me. That was also fantastic. Thank you.
You can turn your cameras on. It shouldn't affect anybody else. Somebody was asking that. Do we have any other questions? Oh, okay.
Do you have an honorary membership in the Klingon Language Institute?
Yes.
Excellent.
Okay, Mark, I gotta ask this. Why doesn't Wales get to be named by its by a native name? Why, instead of all the other countries seem to get their native land.
Well, all the other countries except one besides Wales, and the other one is Scotland. So it's really the same question.
Okay.
And the real answer is I'll have to talk to Maltz to see what he was basing this on, because I'm quite sure that there's two ways to say those countries. And I have to get him to tell me that that's really the case.
Okay.
But the reason he gave me Wales the way he did is because he gave me Scotland the way he did. I know that.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. All right. Thanks.
So one person is asking a question. I'm not quite sure I understand it, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Did Malt make friends with the Dabke Shiknashwak named Worf when you adopted at last qep'a? Or whom you adopted? I guess somebody gave you some kind of...
yeah, where is it?
Okay, here we go.
It's this thing.
Ah, okay.
Okay.
Did he make friends with Malt?
Since this guy's been here? Yeah. Yeah, Maltz talks to him more than he talks to me.
So he's a friend of Maltz.
He's a friend of Maltz.
Did he get his own word?
He got a lot of words.
Oh, but he's not sharing them with you, though.
Including the word for himself, yeah. Yeah, that because I made up the word for that thing, I became a knight. So I'm technically Sir Mark in certain circles.
You became a knight? Who were you knighted by?
I was knighted. I was knighted by the people who that little guy is part of their world.
Oh, okay, I see. Zram suggested you should maybe put a microphone on that little guy, so when he's talking to Maltz, you can overhear everything.
Ah, that's a good idea. What do you think? I should send him in with a wire. Huh?
There you go, undercover work.
Right.
Are there any other questions, comments? Zram asked, who does the cat belong to?
The cat?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure who's asking that question to.
At least I heard earlier there sounded like somebody's cat was mewing on the.
Oh, that was mine.
I don't know. Doesn't bother me any.
He comes in here and complains about not having any food when there's plenty of food upstairs.
Is there more?
Do you make convention appearances around the country?
I did. I did make convention appearances when there was conventions.
I've been going to Emerald City Comic-Con and I've never seen you there.
I've never been there. No.
Remember, Mark, I met you at the 30th anniversary or 20th anniversary of Star Trek in '96. Remember in Huntsville?
In Huntsville, actually. Well, we'd met before that, but we met. We didn't kiss then. Right.
But yeah. So that was and you did some really. I remember you had some talks then. There were some really great questions. There was someone who asked about going into linguistics. It was like really you had really gotten.
I've met a number of people who've gone into linguistics as a result of Klingon, which is great. Yeah, that talk I gave at that convention was very strange.
Yep.
That was the first convention, not strange in a bad way necessarily, but just different from others. It was the first and maybe only convention actually sponsored by Paramount. And therefore they were able to get all kinds of people there. So there was people from the cast of all the shows. Enterprise didn't exist yet, but Voyager did. Along with some real astronauts. And we all were able to get together at certain times and stuff like this. But the way the programming was done in part is they would double bill us. So I was double billed with Dan Curry. So part of the time was him and part of the time was me. And Dan Curry's the special effects guy on Star Trek for a long time. And is responsible for the look of the ships and the look of all kinds of other things. Not special effects, visual effects, that's not the same thing. But he's also the guy who invented the batleth and taught everybody how to use it. You know, how to move it around and what kind of positions to take and things like that. So the way the talk went is I went first and talked for half the time, however long that was. And then it was Dan's turn. And this was a while ago, so I had a microphone when it was my turn. I had a microphone that I would walk around with, and the microphone had a cord on it because that was the technology then. And when we were done, I gave the microphone to Dan, and he started talking about whatever he was talking about, and then he was going to show the batleth. And he brought with him the original batleth, meaning the very first one he made out of metal. That was how he got it on the plane, I don't know. Anyway, he brought that and started to move it around. You know, but in order to do that, he needed two hands, so he put the microphone down. And then people couldn't hear him anymore. So I thought I would be helpful. And I picked the microphone up and put it up towards his mouth, just as he was bringing the batleth up. So I have been attacked by the original batleth, and I'm living to tell the tale.
I've spoken Klingon and have a scar to prove it, literally.
Have you ever gone to the Language Creation Society conferences?
The short answer is no, but with a footnote. The year I did the convention in Vulcan, that very same weekend was one of the conventions of the Language Creation Society. And it was in Calgary. And I don't know, for those of you who don't know Canada, Vulcan and Calgary, I think Vulcan must be a suburb of Calgary or something, even though it's 90 miles away, because people go back and forth all the time as if it's nothing.
Canada's like that.
So even though the convention I was at was in Vulcan, the hotel where we were staying was in Calgary. So I was in Calgary every night. And the Language Creation Society convention was at, I guess, the University of Calgary. Part of their convention that year, so I couldn't go to their convention whether I wanted to or not because I was at the thing in Vulcan, but part of the Language Creation Society convention is they were going to show a movie called Conlanging. Now, Conlanging is a movie about people who conlang, who construct languages.
I was interviewed for that.
Right, and they came to the qep'a one year when it was in Chicago, and they came to one of the qep'a homes in Germany. And the movie features some qep'a people and qep'a home people. And I was one of the, what was my title? Associate producer or something like that for that movie. There was 5 of us. There was me, there's as producers, executive producers or associate producer, whatever time there was me, and there's David Peterson, of course, who did Game of Thrones languages and all that kind of stuff. And there was Paul, I'm blanking on his last name, who did Avatar. I know, that's terrible.
I want to tell you something. Is it possible?
Yeah.
I have my sign up.
Yes, thank you, Andre. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I have my sign up for Germany for qep'a.
Good luck.
Yeah, in November. I hope we can meet there.
Yeah.
What I want to tell you something more about Klingon sounds. I love the cha, the t, the cha. I love this. This is So beautiful, you know.
Good, thank you.
I like the Klingon language.
Good.
You're SochDIch.
So what? Uh-oh.
Well,
What?
while you're on the subject of David Peterson, if I can throw in a quick note, I'm assuming I can be heard. The World Science Fiction Convention was supposed to take place next week in Wellington, New Zealand. And of course, they've gone online like everybody else. And I am doing a panel with David and a number of other people on a wide range of conlangs.
Good.
And the whole process of conlanging. And if you're going to the online WorldCon at the end of the month, then come on by the panel. It should be a lot of fun. David and I have done panels multiple times in the past, and he's always great fun to play with, as Mark knows.
He and I did a joint thing at a convention in Montreal last year called Langfest, the Festival of Languages. So it's people who are multilingual, who come to talk about their own languages and learn other languages and meet other people who speak lots of languages and things like that. So he and I each did our sort of separate presentations, but then we did one together and talked about we should take this thing on the road. Of course, we didn't, and now no one's going on the road. So. Yeah, I hope that the qep'a happens. It's got the same kind of issues as the qep'a. Maybe November's far enough away and Europe's in better shape.
Okay, I have been told that it is time for us to actually wrap up this conversation. It has been a lot of fun and thoroughly entertaining and informative, but we have to move on to our next event, which is a concert by the famous Jembom. Yes. Are you here, Jembom? Are you on this?
I am. I'm not running video. We are actually having a major Comcast outage in my area. So I'm doing everything off of a hotspot right now. So I'm just going to do voice through Zoom.
Okay, we probably want to turn off the recording at this point. I don't think we need to record.
Turning it off now.
Okay.